So everybody, thanks for joining us. We have a mining panel now. So I have a couple of people very experienced in the mining sector, in the services sector. I have Pierre Rochard from Riot, and I got Bob Burnett from Barefoot Mining, and I have Bitcoin Mechanic from Bitcoin Mechanic, right?
Ocean.
Ocean. Okay. So I guess first of all, how many people have participated in Bitcoin mining in the last 10 or 15 years? Anybody? Right. So we got some fans in here, some prosumers. Bitcoin mining obviously is something it's one of the most fascinating things for me that got me into Bitcoin initially. The concept. And my name is CJ Wilson. I'm a car dealer, but I like Bitcoin stuff as well. I think it's so fascinating because it's one of the few industries that you can participate in as a pleb. And the same rules apply, right? That if you're a big elephant in the room. So I guess we just go through on background a little bit, and Pierre, what got you into Bitcoin mining? I guess, and how close to your Bitcoin journey did you hop into Bitcoin mining?
Very, very late in my Bitcoin journey, because my first exposure to Bitcoin mining was a company called Butterfly Labs. And Butterfly Labs was around 2013, 2014. And, they were advertising on the Bitcoin Talk forums. And there were lots of threads about people who had ordered their Butterfly Labs ASICs and had not received the pre-order. And then they got shut down by the FTC. So even though I didn't lose any money in it, because I was just kind of just watching it from the sidelines, it certainly gave me the impression that Bitcoin mining was riskier than just buying spot Bitcoin on Coinbase, just buying it on the exchange. So left mining alone for a while and was really just interested in Bitcoin, Lightning, and kind of the software stack until about a couple of years ago. And a few years ago, I was on the advisory board for Riot because they wanted some advice. And so my advice was, hey, focus on Bitcoin mining. And that's what they executed on. And then a couple of years ago, went in-house. And so mostly they didn't hire me, obviously, for my complete lack of knowledge of Bitcoin mining and electricity. Rather, what they wanted was to have the ability to push back on some of the arguments that were being made attacking Bitcoin and attacking Bitcoin mining by the likes of Senator Elizabeth Warren. And so that's been my focus over the past couple of years. And I think that'll continue, but that's how I got interested in Bitcoin mining, is arguing about it on Twitter.
For me, the journey was, I think, somewhat unique in that I came in through a shitcoin backdoor, and my background is in computer design. I was the chief technical officer for Gateway back in the 90s, and so I started in this business because somebody called me and asked me to start designing and building Ethereum mining servers for them. And through that process, I got exposed to mining. Then I decided I didn't like Ethereum and had to come to the light side from the dark side. And, here I am.
Right. And we're talking about how we got into mining. I mean, Butterfly Labs origin story as well. Like, I was mining with a graphics card. I broke a Mac Pro trying to get it to work, I think. And I was in London, so the electricity prices were insane. I had a jalapeno Butterfly Labs, which was like that little 6 gigahash thing, and it mined 7 Bitcoins in a day. And I could have bought 20 Bitcoins if I'd have just, spent the electricity bill buying Bitcoins instead. And then I was with Eligius, which was Ocean V1. And that fell out of favor, or, Luke stopped working on it because it was just a hobby project. And now it's back to sort of give transparency back in the mining space, where it's become controlled by a tiny sort of cartel that offer, an interface between the government and Bitcoin, and they sort of clean it up, present it in a way that makes things tolerable to the authorities. And that is not something that escapes the Faustian bargain dynamics you might expect from something like that. So yeah, I'm back in the mining space now after having been out of it for a few years, and working for Ocean and trying to bring transparency into the whole part of the ecosystem.
Well, and transparency is one of the things that I think Riot especially has a transparent to a fault, right? It's a huge company now with a huge facility, building another facility in Corsicana, right? Um, what's the biggest challenge that Riot has right now? Obviously, the video you did showing the emissions and stuff, that was great last year. But I think like you have a target on your back as a big mining company, right? And we can defend ourselves with memes, of course, and shitposts on X. What else is Riot doing other than just being successful in order to kind of build a moat around their business in the regulatory landscape right now?
Yeah, so there's definitely there's what we see on social media, which is kind of the tip of the iceberg. But then underwater, there's lots going on in terms of one, building a public policy team in house. Have been really excited to see how that has developed at Riot and at other Bitcoin mining companies as well. And then, of course, building up all the infrastructure around in the policy space of making sure that we have excellent research so that we are data driven and we can show that, hey, the facts are on our side, Bitcoin mining is good. And then being able to communicate those through lobbyists, right? Through the advocacy angles, both legislative, executive branch, and then also judiciary, right? So making sure that the attorneys who might not understand C++, at least we can provide them enough information so that they understand Bitcoin and they can effectively defend it in court, which they have done. So I think that there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into defending Bitcoin from policy attacks, essentially. And then you have to duplicate it because you have to have this at the federal level, but you also need it at the state level. Unfortunately, we've seen some attacks come from Texas lawmakers, but we also have to, I think, to an audience like this, to the public, we have to put things into perspective, which is that every industry in the world is constantly under attack from a policy perspective. There's always somebody trying to take something from the industry, right? Whether it's trying to slap taxes on it or trying to raise regulations on it, et cetera. So essentially, there's a saying that says, hey, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And so you have to play the game, you got to be at the table, and you have to engage in it. And I think that the really cool part about it from Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining perspective is that we've not only or have we been effective at being at the table, but then when it comes to actually, from a substantive perspective of providing policy recommendations and then substantiating those with like evidence and arguments, we got a huge leg up because we're aligned with reality, which is Bitcoin, and that's the future, and it's also present reality. And our opponents, all they have are terrible arguments because basically the thing is that what's on the menu right now is fiat currency, right? And we know that the table is Bitcoin, and so they understand that what's at stake here is really almost a civilizational like capture the flag game, right? Where the flag is the money printer. We're saying, hey, destroy the flag, and everyone else is freaking out, right? And so that's I think that when we look at why is Elizabeth Warren concerned about anti-money laundering and Bitcoin? She's never been concerned about anti-money laundering and X, right? It's just never been a topic she's been interested in. But then suddenly with Bitcoin, now she is like advocating for a police state, right? We need a totalitarian system. So why is that? Well, it's because Bitcoin's saying, hey, look, we're going to take the money printer away from you and your allies. And that is obviously going to severely undermine everything that she's been working for her entire life. And so it should be expected that people are going to attack Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And at the same time, we shouldn't also have kind of a victimization mindset because the reality is that the Elizabeth Warrens of the world are a very small percentage of the political class, right? You would expect that 99% of the political class would be freaking out about losing the money printer, but most of them either they like the money printers going away, right, for ideological reasons, or that they are kind of seeing the writing on the wall and it's inevitable, right? And so the number of politicians who are actually fighting, it's in the tiny minority, and it doesn't take a lot of pushback to kind of keep them in, compartmentalize their ideology.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like I noticed when we're doing the Bitcoin advocacy stuff in DC, just as a group, whether it's Bitcoin policy or Bitcoin Today coalition, whatever. There's the way I look at it is the political spectrum is like you have these people on the far edges, right? And it's kind of like bullhorns. There's people really leaning hard on the right or the left or whatever it is, and they're shouting and like lobbing grenades at each other effectively, and everybody else is getting caught in the crossfire. They happen to get the most clicks, so they're the loudest and they're the most replicated, voices, which is why Sherman or Warren or these other people that are illogical get airtime when they're talking about Bitcoin. But I think what I've seen over the last couple of years is as the individual states have looked at Bitcoin and especially mining because they see a direct correlation between either revenue or energy policy or whatever, you're seeing some of the states, hey, this is an opportunity for us to lead something. We don't have to rely on New York or California or something like that. And you see Texas and some of these other states, they're welcoming miners, right? I guess. And one of the things, Bob, for you, you guys are in different types of locations, right? You have
Correct.
kind of decentralized, right? And each project, we were talking about this in the lobby, each project is sort of its own project.
Correct.
So how do you guys like kind of pregame where you're going to look for and how that's going to be maybe impacted, or is that a friendly state or something like that? Is that something you guys push into?
Yeah, we have a flow chart essentially that we use when we're looking to expand, which is pretty much all the time. But we're typically looking for energy first, but only energy in jurisdictions that we feel comfortable in. And that's true not only in the U.S., but that's true globally too. It's the things that Pierre and CJ were just talking about, they're global issues. In fact, I'll comment on that in a second. But what we're looking for is we want to be in a friendly place. We want first of all to minimize our risk of either being regulated out or banned out or taxed out. But we also want our operation to be in a place where the community likes us and accepts us, where people are proud to work for us, proud to say, hey, I work for Barefoot Mining, or I've heard Pierre and the Riot people say like they want their employees to be the same, right? You don't want to have your employees be ashamed of where they work. and they shouldn't be, right? We're doing something very big and noble. I will say though that this battle that we talked about with Elizabeth Warren, who I despise, and people like that, and like the Brad Shermans, I think that were talked about before. But the same thing's happening in Europe. I actually had to spend a day and a half last week writing a 20-page paper as part of testimony in Europe to fight against a ban trying to basically come out through the whole EU on mining. And both their energy pricing and their regulatory environment has kept all of us, big and small, pretty much out of that environment for a long time. But one of the things I've made, like in my point back to them, is I think this European proposal to ban mining, I think, could be an event that, if they put it in force, would essentially send Europe back to the Dark Ages. That they could greatly cripple the entire economic structure of Europe by doing that. And we'll see those places in the U.S. that have supported it, but also the El Salvadors and the other countries of the world that are embracing it rise to the top of the economic pile.
All right. So can you tell us a little bit about Ocean? You brought up the transparency aspect, right? When we have these people coming after us from you use too much energy standpoint, or we have, this much block space allocated to these types of operations or whatever it is. Give me a little bit about your perspective on what Ocean can do in the sort of grand scope of like, what is it that got you to commit to working with them and coming out of the mining retirement, so to speak?
I guess don't trust, verify is a mantra that exists in the space that is completely disregarded in the mining space. There is no transparency in what occurs with the main pools. Miners have elected for this solution that puts primarily cash flow at the front of everything, above everything, including profitability and certainly verifiability. And just complete trust is granted to the pool. And that goes and interacts with the chain and says, don't worry to the miners. And the miners increasingly are taking part in a diminishing role in securing the network, because miners aren't just providing, the energy wall, as Michael Saylor likes to refer to it, with the hash rate. But Bitcoin mining is the process of deciding what goes in the blockchain. And that's all been delegated to a handful of people now. And those people are now in a position where they just decide whether a transaction gets in the chain or not. That's not credibly decentralized, and it's not a thing that we can afford to lie to ourselves about as being resilient. So the primary goal of Ocean was we need to decentralize template construction. It needs to be up to miners what goes in the blocks so that they can be called miners again, rather than just hashers that go and do whatever pools tell them to do. And I think but more insidiously than that, I've learned since working for Ocean that miners aren't necessarily just concerned with cash flow and having a pool say, don't worry, I'll deal with the randomness of the network and pay you a fixed rate per whatever you do anyway. So don't worry about Bitcoin, I'll deal with that. It's also they want someone to go and comply for them. And this is the sort of double-edged sword of it. Like I think I would speak for myself here rather than for Ocean in my general outlook. Like I tend to like adversarial state behavior personally because it forces people into better practices. Like you have a trend for people to always adopt efficiency and centralization because it just works better. It's smoother. But that's PayPal. That's always good and more convenient until it blows up in your face and you get your account banned.
It becomes a trap, basically, because people fall for the laziness aspect and they don't realize, like you're saying, that the adversary creates friction. Friction creates some sort of evolution or some sort of adaptation.
Yeah, if you want, like, if there's an image hosted, if there's a video hosted on YouTube and that's where everyone goes, great. If there's a video of a very, very illegal occurrence that YouTube are booting off all the time, then it gets uploaded everywhere and you get the Streisand effect, right? So that's kind of what I appreciate from antagonistic behavior. And I don't think it's idealistic. I think it's like the ultimate in pragmatism. If the EU were to ban Bitcoin mining, I would secretly be happy because I don't want massive publicly traded, all respect to Riot. I don't want those massive entities that don't really provide a quite illusory boundary and protection for Bitcoin. The security aspect of Bitcoin that's provided by miners, if it's in the hands of a giant hashing entity that is doing everything it's told to by the US government, I don't think I'd take much comfort in that. And there's certainly been some debates between Bob and publicly traded miners where he talks about, wild horses versus elephants. And we love this. This is like permeated Bitcoin now, this characterization of different sizes. And, you have wild horses and captive horses, but the elephants are they have no hope. They will become deputized enforcers of what's allowable and permissible in the chain. And it's kind of, it's the PayPal analogy again. Like you can orange pill someone and say, use Bitcoin, you got to download a node and have a wallet and then do this and learn about coin control and then do some, coin joins and all that, and then open a lightning channel and all this. And they're like, look, I'm just going to use PayPal and you're a dumbass for trying to use this complicated system. I'm like, well, wait till your account gets canceled. That's how I feel about the mining space at the moment. Like you have these incredibly convenient, very guaranteed, reliable things. Don't worry about random blocks. You'll get paid no matter what. And don't worry about, what goes in the chain. We'll deal with all that. And don't worry about any of this stuff. We'll handle it as a pool and just send us some KYC information and all that stuff. This is very permissioned. It's very fragile, but it's very efficient. So people have opted for it. It's super easy. But in my estimation, that's a fragile system that is not one that's going to last. And Ocean has presented a completely new model. There's no mention of the United States dollar anywhere. It's not what it's about. It's not a custodian. It doesn't volunteer itself as being one. Around 90% of everything that gets mined in the blockchain is in the hands of miners the minute the block exists. No other pool operates like that. So when it comes down to regulation and people breathing down our necks, we're going to say, look, we don't control any of this stuff. We're not going to comply on the miner's behalf and get them on the hook. We're going to say, if regulator, you can't come to one of 5 pools. You need to go to one of 40,000 miners around this country. Good luck. And
Around
if you
the
don't
world.
like this, right. And also, if you don't like what's in this block, here's the Bitcoin address that mined it. Go find that guy. We
Well-
don't know who he is. We don't collect information. This is something that can last for decades.
And this is something I think is important to understand too, because Pierre mentioned that every industry is under attack all the time, right? So I'm in the car business, and there's like these regulations. They're saying, oh, every car has to be electric by this date or something like that. There's been pushes to say, oh, there needs to be an environmental angle, to the ESG angle to mining and stuff like that. And we've had these conversations for the last couple of years, just as Bitcoin people in the public, about ESG is a scam. We've had some great memes about it. It's been very productive, I think, in general, because like you said, there has to be a loser in a way when you have at least the way I look at it, it's always a winner and a loser, but overall Bitcoin wins. Over a long enough period of time. Now, there's going to be economic pain for different people that invest at different parts of the cycle, right? But effectively, what happens is, let's say, for example, and this is where I can ask Pierre the question: if Riot gets a certain amount of pressure, then how can Riot manage to diversify the pressure points or the pressure sources? Because what you guys are doing directly is going head on to DC and head on at the state level, and you're playing their game. Right. So you're saying, oh, this is the rules you're setting for us. We're going to go at you with lobbyists. We're going to go at you with policy. We're going to go at you with logic. We're going to go at you with the stuff in a way like Riot can outlast Elizabeth Warren specifically, because she's going to time out at some point, just like Dianne Feinstein and Pelosi. But I guess the kind of not as good of a joke as I was hoping it was going to be. But the but the thing is, there are different models to mining, right? And Riot being a big miner, an elephant, okay, you do have thicker skin that way too, right? So there is a benefit to being able to fund, because you have a big enough operation that it's a critical mass. So you can fund some of the DC efforts through that. Whereas, it's possible that, yes, some guy mining in Iowa using liquid cooling in his house to heat his pool, he's going to be on whatever pool he wants to be on. But you guys have a more specific task, right? So that's more centralized to your business.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, to respond to the comment about, we want Bitcoin to be anti-fragile, right? And so on some level, we have to understand what is the security model here, right? With Bitcoin mining. And so when I hear that, it's good for there to be a crackdown on Bitcoin mining so that it decentralizes, I mean, would it be good for there to be laws against Bitcoin conferences so that it forces us to decentralize, right? Like, isn't this a huge weakness that we're all here today, Or maybe it would be better if there were like terrorist attacks at Bitcoin conferences so that we start wearing body armor, and we can be less fragile. Well, all these things come with a cost, right? And so, it is more efficient to live in a high trust society that we don't have to worry about these things. And so, I do think that we should actually we should want things to be to live in a society where it's okay to have centralization. Now, that has never worked for money in particular, because with money, with centralization, then you've got the money printer and people start printing money for themselves and enriching themselves. But for other systems, I don't think that we should necessarily approach it that way. And so, for example, with Bitcoin mining, I think that the economics scale pretty well. That is that there's plenty of situations where home mining is economical because you're using the waste heat, or you have on-site solar, you have some kind of other angle to where you're able to make it home mining profitable. And then at the medium size, you might have a piece of stranded energy, right? A flared natural gas site or a remote hydro solution where if you wouldn't be able to scale that up, right? You wouldn't be able to throw 100,000 miners onto it, but you can put 500 and the economics work out. And then obviously at the large scale, like Riot, where you're connected to the grid and you're able to mine at scale and have economies of scale there and efficiency, you can still be profitable. And so I think that there's a business model at every scale that is profitable and that works well. But that from the perspective of policy, that the biggest Bitcoin miners obviously are going to have the most resources to throw at paying for lobbyists, paying for campaign contributions, and all of that jazz. So um, by doing that, I think in a way, I don't want this to sound egotistical or that like, hey, we should get credit for this, because I don't think we do. We should, because in the sense that we're doing this for ourselves, but we are also, by advocating for Bitcoin mining, advocating for the home miner, right? So it's not like we're going to DC and saying, hey, it should be illegal for people to mine at home, but grid mining for industrial scale, that should be illegal, right? That would be, as Jimmy Song was pointing out, that would be rent seeking, right? No, what we're doing when we go advocate for Bitcoin mining is, first of all, we advocate for Bitcoin. Because if people don't understand the value of Bitcoin,
they'll never understand mining.
You have to doesn't matter what you say about
matters.
Mining.
Yeah,
they'll even spending time thinking about Bitcoin mining is wasteful if you think that Bitcoin itself has zero value. And so lots of Bitcoin education going on there. And then the other part of it too, I think, is really important from a sociological perspective that we have to connect with, is that, I'm an ANCAP. Lots of us are anarchists, so we don't like the government. We don't like politicians. That's not the society we live in, though. The reality is that in today's society, politicians are some of the most influential people in their communities, right? By nature of having to get enough votes to get elected, right? So if you orange pill a state representative, you might have, over the next 5 years, orange pilled 20 community leaders that he's going to talk to about Bitcoin when they ask him about it, because they want to get their thoughts on it. So I think that in a way, from an orange pilling perspective, lobbying for Bitcoin mining is a very scalable way to orange pill lots of different people.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we talked about initially when we started thinking, hey, we have to go to DC and advocate for it. There's about 400 or 500 people that really matter in DC. And it's going to be easier to either convince or replace those 400 or 500 people than it will be to onboard 2 million people or 3 million people on a cost per basis, right? You have to spend a certain amount of time talking to a Ted Cruz or a Lummis or whoever it is, and you can give up on the Brad Shermans knowing you're never going to get in the door, and then you can focus on somebody in Colorado, somebody in Nebraska, something like that, and they're all there effectively. They're centralized, which creates a vulnerability for them, and they legally have to take meetings. So for anybody that wants to get involved in DC, meeting state representatives, anybody that's not from Texas, it's a great thing to do. It's a very rewarding thing. I know you do it a lot. I've done it a bunch of times. So Bob, in that regard, right, are there jurisdictions that you don't want to deal with at all, and you guys write them off and you wait for someone new to come in to that seat because you feel like it's a governor or a congressman issue, or do you feel like it's just sort of a state identity that's just going to be more friendly to energy, Bitcoin, and all those things?
It's more the latter, that I think certain states represent, I think, a certain philosophical approach to life and culture and business. And to be real straightforward, present me a great deal in Los Angeles County, I'm not going. I'm not going into Elizabeth Warren's backyard. There are 10 or 12 states we would not even look at a deal in. I will say, just to comment on a couple of the other things, I think that to the credit of the big miners, which I'm sometimes very critical of them, to the credit, they have done good things, to Pierre's point, in supporting some of the big voice and the money that we need in Washington to fight. But I'll also say, I want to say that I don't think that's our biggest fight. It's not our biggest issue with Bitcoin. It's not our biggest issue with mining. I'll go back to what Mechanic was saying. We have issues within the mining ecosystem that extend through the entire Bitcoin ecosystem. Our biggest threat is ourselves. It's centralization of mining pools. It's some of the bullshit going on with the opcodes and exploits of segmented witness. Those are the things that worry me. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about these other issues. I have to address them, in my own small way for Barefoot. I've testified in state senates. I just told you I just wrote a big testimony to support the EU, and we, in our small way, contribute money. But again, that's not what I worry about. And I do want to say also, just a full disclosure, that I am on the board of directors at Ocean, and I'm an investor in Ocean. So anything I say in support of them, I want you all to know that I certainly have an incentive for that. But the reason that I did that is because I feel it is a path, hopefully not the only path, but it's the only one I see to fight some of these issues that I don't want to call them existential to Bitcoin, but I'll call maybe existential to Bitcoin as we know it.
So, okay, touch on that for a second. So, in the lobby, we were talking about the general block reward. Obviously, here we are, like 6 or 7 days before the halving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, for some people, this is their first time, like, I guess, being as aware as they are of the halving taking place. People come to Bitcoin new all the time. A lot of you guys have been in it for, 10 plus years or something. What are we in for in the next cycle, this next 4 years with mining? Do we see more mining pools popping up, or do we see consolidation? Obviously, there's only a couple hardware manufacturers for all this stuff. Are there going to be more people hot rodding and hot wiring and trying to come up with their own stuff, the same way that we all have very few ways of doing block templates? I mean, like, what do you see, Mechanic, on the front of that in this I guess through the lens of transparency?
It's a huge question. So part of it comes down to the transition away from subsidy, which was predictable, to transaction fee sustained environment for miners, which is unpredictable. FPPS, which is the dominant payout model, basically the only pool that doesn't pay out FPPS now is Ocean. The FPPS model basically just offered a way to smooth out the variance of what miners receive. And it could do so in a way that didn't require much trust, because miners could verify what they expected to get every 10 minutes, because 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes is extremely predictable. And there were no transaction fees throwing any uncertainty into the mix. And that got worse with 25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes and worse with 12.5. And it's about to get really bad, because we regularly have blocks over a Bitcoin worth of transaction fees, and we're only going to have 3 1/8 Bitcoin in the subsidy. In that environment, predicting what you're supposed to get from a pool that doesn't share any data with you about what they got and how they split things from the blockchain is a complete shot in the dark. They're saying, hey, we made this much money and here's your split of it. And you're saying, okay. And your verification comes from what happened on the blockchain, kind of, except you have no way of knowing how many other people are on the pool, and a variety of other factors you need to be able to verify anything. And it's just basically FPPS has become a guarantee that is something that is we are much less able to take the claims it makes seriously. With every halving, that gets more of a stretch. And this one, we transition into a transaction fee environment where it becomes incredibly difficult for FPPS to survive, in my opinion. There's already a lot of claims made that I find extremely credible, that high transaction fee environments are the ones where miners say, something's up, I'm not getting the reward I was supposed to get. And I've seen there are multiple people mining with Ocean that have just told us personally, yeah, when the fees go sky high, that's when suddenly we don't get the money we expected to. We look at the blockchain, we look at our rewards, and it's just not right. So we've had a lot of people just come to us over that. A lot of other people just actually aren't paying much attention to what they get, which is quite funny to think about, but that's inertia is what it is. So I think the transition basically comes, we have to wrestle with the question that is an uncomfortable one, that Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a world that's on a fiat standard, and miners can make money from other sources. And every time they do make money from other sources, they become less incentivized to maintain the integrity of Bitcoin itself. So currently, if miners are making an absolute fortune from attacking the network, which unfortunately they are, the sort of game theoretical cope that everyone has, which is miners can always make more money doing stuff which helps Bitcoin, so the system is impregnable. That isn't necessarily true. The crudest example I can give of that is, hi, we're a government. We want you to mine empty blocks, and we won't charge you any taxes if you do that. like, or something like that, or sort of like go OFAC compliant, miss out 3 transactions every block, but your legal department will save $10 million a year if you do that. Like, there's all these sort of perverse incentives that can creep into the system, and just assuming that money will fix everything is unfortunately not true until you're on a Bitcoin standard, which we're not. So at the moment, the fiat money printer can print what it needs to make miners do things which don't do anything, which make nodes harder to run, which encumber us with stuff in the chain that's difficult to verify, that will last until the end of time, that is earning a pittance in extra money. It's not the most comfortable situation, but things have actually changed rapidly since Ocean launched, and the conversation's progressed a lot. I've never seen so many people do a 180 on an opinion since Ocean launched and announced, well, had a manifestly anti-spam policy. There was a massive reaction to that and backlash that said, this is just censorship. And 90% of that was people not understanding how Bitcoin nodes have always had things they do along those lines. You're asking people, why does op return exist? Why do you have a data carrier size at all? Do you know what these things do? Because the NOTS node that we're running has data carrier size of 42, core has it at 83. There's not a threshold there where suddenly it becomes censorship because you've made that number smaller. It's literally just a pragmatic approach to minimizing the storage of arbitrary data in Bitcoin, because that doesn't do anything to help the ecosystem. It's actually a net negative. Even though it earns miners a little bit extra in fees, it doesn't help with making a global monetary, uncorruptible global money. It doesn't help with that. It actually just is a parasitic entity that sits on top of that. Conversations around what you can do about that and all that is different. So to get back to your original point that you raised, what happens when the halving occurs and there is an enormous spam attack at the same time, and miners are making the majority of their money from something that has nothing to do with Bitcoin? It's a new cat meme or dog meme or something like that. Surprise, surprise, that doesn't add any security to the network. It's miners making money from something that's nothing to do with Bitcoin that actually is harmful to nodes. And ultimately, you come down to this sort of false impression that we've all been laboring under, myself included. I realized I was wrong. Bitcoin is not here to make miners rich. Miners have a job to do, and they need to do that job properly. And in the process, they will get rich. But if they are getting rich at the expense of the network, then we don't do ourselves any favor by pretending that things aren't broken. We have to actually think about what we're going to do with it. And we have misaligned incentives. We've, just to really round up here, I know I'm going on a while. We've had a situation before where Bitcoin's game theory didn't all perfectly align. It was the fork wars. Miners wanted that, nodes wanted this. Hodlers wanted the other thing, devs wanted that, exchanges wanted this. It was all different. There was sort of some coagulation of camps, and you basically had the big exchanges, and you had one big mining entity, Bitmain, saying we don't want SegWit, and you had everything else saying we do. And the community fought it out, and the nodes won. And we're in that situation again at the moment, where you have a similar dynamic at play, where nodes are saying, this stuff doesn't do any good for me. I don't want to store a picture of a frog for the rest of time that has nothing to do with anything financial whatsoever. But a miner made an extra 40 cents putting it in there. That's a misalignment of incentives, and someone has to win that. Otherwise,
because it's back to the adversarial thing, right? So there's always a winner and a loser. And in some cases, economically, as the price goes up, the losers are the people trying to transact on the base layer because they might not be able to get in because someone else is paying a higher fee or whatever, because the block space is limited. So I want to jump on one thing really quick, because Bob and I talked about this, and I'm going to let Pierre finish because I think he's got a really good answer for this. But Bob, we were talking about the non-Bitcoin things that happen with miners, the choices that they make, right, and how that can damage or lessen the security budget. One of the things that you and I were talking about in the lobby was what happens when miners start selling electricity instead of mining Bitcoin, right? And what's your take on that? And I know it's a little bit spicy, but you're wearing orange shoes, so I'm going to let you take it.
Yeah, orange shirt. Well, it's a two-sided coin. I think that on one side, in defense of it, you'd say, hey, if the miners build out all this capacity and they use all this energy, and on occasion they have to push it all back for the greater good of the grid, then there's a common good or a greater good that occurs from it. That's one side of it. The other side of it, I think it's more of it's not really even a good or bad. It's more of just a reality of knowing what it is. And I think Mechanic said it. If we get to the point where this becomes commonplace, I don't know that it would or it wouldn't, but like if you look at Europe right now and their situation, and the variability of the energy, that could be a very common thing. We could see situations where the hash rate directed at available to secure the whole network starts to become much more variable, and that is a risk. But given that I know we're winding down here, let me kind of just go off of that one, take this just a slightly different direction. One of the other things I think that's happening is there's this belief that's, I think, very common of kind of this merging of the energy sector and the mining sector. And there's certainly tremendous synergies. We're part of that. Certainly, Pierre's organization is part of that. But I think what people are sleeping on is that there's also a merger of the product of Bitcoin, which is our block space, and the financial sector. And I think what you're going to see coming in the next cycle, I think you had asked Mechanic this question, like what things to expect. I think you're going to see the financial services companies moving heavy into mining. Now that may be more ownership of mining companies, contracts with mining companies. They are going to want to be part of the block template creation. They're going to want to control the cost and the availability. If you've heard me speak before, we talk a lot about like, hey, the base layer is really a finite entity. Block space is a commodity. And I think those realities are going to come real hard, real fast to people. You've gotten a taste of it in 2023. This next cycle, this next 4-year cycle, they're going to come really hard. And I think the importance of the mining sector and this block template creation is going to become apparent. And I think the importance of what are the rules of block template creation, what are the acceptable behaviors in block template creation, become very important. But know this, at the end of the day, it is the miners or the block template creators that make that choice. So you can leave it to 6 pools to make all of those choices, or you can hope that Ocean and hopefully other things decentralize that, and we have thousands of block template creators.
Now, so on that note, just for the crowd, so thinking about this, as we've seen the ETFs and Wall Street and huge organizations get involved in Bitcoin purchasing and Bitcoin custodianship and stuff like that through IRAs and everything else, what Bob's basically saying is that a Fidelity or a BlackRock or whoever might need to do 20, 30, 50, 100,000 transactions in a year and would effectively buy that block space ahead of time or contract for that block space so they can consolidate UTXOs or whatever they have to do to manage their clients' Bitcoin or something like that. So that's a really interesting vector that, like, we haven't seen that yet, but that's because we also haven't had players that size, right?
Well, we kind of have seen it a little bit. I mean, Fidelity's been involved in mining for a long time, maybe not for that purpose. And the emergence in the last few months of Swan is I think hard evidence of it. That they're at what 7, 8 exahashes of 1.2% of the overall hash rate right now is with a Bitcoin financial services company.
Okay, so Pierre, this one's for you. In the next 4 years, which also happens to coincide with election cycles across the country, do you see more people joining the DC fight that you guys are in, or do you see more Parker Lewis running for mayor type situations where Bitcoiners themselves are so empowered by let's say the price action or something like that, that they just decide to retire, eject, and then, like an old Roman Republic, do something for the people because now they've made it? Which one of those do you see as more of a kind of a cause in the next couple of years?
I'd say the former rather than the latter. I think that the luxury of Bitcoin policymaking is that we don't have to get into conversations about healthcare policy, right? Which, if you're a politician, you do have to get into conversations about healthcare policy. And so, for a Bitcoiner to become a politician, it's like, hey, do you want to go from thinking about Bitcoin 100% of your time to thinking about it 1% of your time? And that's pretty unappealing. So I think that that will, not happen for a while.
But as an ANCAP, I can see you saying that. But as a
Yeah.
dad, right?
Yeah.
Don't you owe it to your kids to help make the world a better place? So when they're adults, they don't have to work. Because the way I look at it,
Yeah.
I look at it a little bit differently. I think, okay, not that I've got Bitcoin figured out, but I've got my stance and my position and my role in Bitcoin figured out. So I don't really have to think about Bitcoin. I just have to continue to DCA and continue to manage my UTXOs and like that basic stuff. Once you've set up your sort of retirement, inheritance, all that stuff, then it's like, okay, well, that part of my life, and the way I think people say this is like in Parker's talk, fix the money first, take the fly out of the ointment. Then it allows us to do other things, and some of those things might self-correct, I guess, which is the way I look at it. So if we can take the cancel-on effect out of politics as much as possible without getting assassinated, it's possible, then maybe we can do something better. Not better, like Bitcoin's not important, but like some people will have done so much in Bitcoin that they'll be like, okay, I'm burned out, because burnout is real in Bitcoin because it's 24/7, right?
Yeah. I guess I would say, as a dad, I want to spend time with my kids. I don't really want to spend time on healthcare policy, but I understand there's a necessity for it, and I applaud the people dedicating the time to that service. But just to loop back, I mean, I think that for Bitcoin mining, as Bitcoin miners, we do like to kind of play up. Oh, we're securing the network, and this is so important. But the reality is, from my analysis of how Bitcoin works, the Bitcoin miners don't actually secure the network. What secures the network is nodes, and they've underwritten, their willingness to take in 4 million weight units every 10 minutes, and that's kind of the then we have to look at what are the other services, right? What value is Bitcoin mining created? One is destroying seigniorage, right? So destroying the issuance, right? The value of issuing the coin, the seigniorage, consuming that and converting it into heat, right? I think that's a really important value, because otherwise you have a rent seeker come and try to take that seigniorage, usually a politician or a banker. The second functionality that we've talked a lot about is the transaction finality functionality of Bitcoin, of including transactions in a block. And I think that it's correct that there has been this division of labor that has emerged in the industry between selecting transactions to include them in a block at the pool level versus hashing at kind of the mining rig level. And that division of labor, I mean, I think it is fragile in a sense, but I also I don't see anything imminently that is going to change it, because the transparency in terms of making sure that you're getting paid out the correct amount, that is driven through contractual relationships, which I know that as ANCAPs we don't like contracts, we don't like fiat auditors. But I don't know that there's a problem there yet, but we'll see.
But mining pools can evolve though as well, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
effectively, it's a software choice that they can make on a very, very, just like people have copied Bitcoin's code into these other things and modified it. Do you see people modifying, these mining pool algorithms so that they can benefit more people if suddenly their customers are leaving and going to Ocean?
Well, I mean, I'm rather incredulous that you don't consider that to be a problem. Like, we have multiple people, like I already said it, we have many people that are saying in high transaction fee environments, I just don't get what I'm supposed to have gotten. Ocean published what it has paid versus our estimates of what other FPPS pools pay since launch, and it is way above 100%. It was up over 110%. Some of that is due to just the nature of launching a payout structure like ours. That accounts for a lot of it. But given the fact that we don't include certain lucrative spam transactions in our default template, and every single block we've found has been that default template, we should have been underpaying versus other pools, and we were overpaying significantly. So I think the problem is already there, and I think the reason it's not as outrageously, it's not been a massive exodus, is because it's a new paradigm people have got to accept. And also, like I said at the beginning, miners aren't solving primarily for profitability, they're solving for cash flow, because they just need regular income to be able to pay regular bills. So rather tangential point I'll just make quickly is, like, if you want to attack Bitcoin and you naively do it the way the white paper would lay out, you don't outmine Riot, because that's a fortune. What you do is you get the regulatory apparatus around Riot and you say, well, you got to do this and you got to do that. And to me, that's just mission creep. Like, you
But
just
the problem with that approach is that it doesn't work, right? Because at the end of the day, like, let's have a thought experiment. What if there was only enough security budget, right, to pay for one laptop, right? Only one laptop. That's all. Now, if that person using the laptop starts censoring, well, then the transaction fees start getting bid up in the mempool. Now you've got somebody else with their laptop, and they come online. And so, in a way, like, there being one miner in the world is not centralization, and it does not affect Bitcoin security model at all, because it's still permissionless and there's still a second person who can come online, right? And so that, I think, same thing with self-custody, right? Or running a node. There is the actual act of running a node, and then there's also the freedom and the ability to run a node or to hold your own keys. And so when somebody is using Coinbase, I find it bizarre when people are like, Bitcoin has failed because this person is using a centralized custodian. It's like, well,
they don't have to.
Yeah, they don't have to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think sorry for going over here. Someone can come and hook my neck off stage in a minute. I'm saying, when it comes to like that cope, really, of just saying we can't, it's not going to be an issue because someone else can mine. The trouble is the environment matters, the externalities. Like, if you're like, Canada is way worse. Like, big shock horror, Canada is worse. Like, when it comes to this regulatory element, they say to the miners, it's a 30% tax. But if you're not a miner, if you're only a hasher and you're running a hash rate rental service, you're not really a Bitcoin miner, you get 15% of it back. Now, this is the worst kind of regulatory thing to put on someone, is you take all their money and then you give it all back to them, and you hoodwink them by saying, don't worry, it works out the same for you because you're getting all your money back, right? So the fact that they do that in Canada means the people go, all right, well, it makes no difference. I'll just say I'm hash rate rental rather than a real Bitcoin miner. There's only one pool offering that kind of service. It's Foundry. So the whole idea that if a pool ever goes rogue, we just switch pools or whatever. Like, well, only one pool offers the kind of service that lets you have the tax arrangement you have. So you're now stuck. And if anyone else wants to come along and be the anti-censorship miner, they have to pay twice the tax of anyone else. So the fact that that's a reality in an environment they find themselves in means that, like, I just find it a little bit naive to look at it and go, well, in a perfect world, the censorer loses money versus the non-censorship, because you have to take into account these externalities.
So I'm going to wrap us up there. We went over a little bit. Sorry, Gary. But thanks to everybody for joining us on the panel. If you have questions for Bob, Pierre, and Mechanic, we'll be in the hallway, and you can hopefully stab us in our stomach, not the back. Thanks.